All right. So, hi everybody. My name is Liz Valladares. I am the outreach coordinator for the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Estuary program. I am also the Urban Waters Ambassador for the Passaic River. I'm so glad that you are all here today. I want to welcome you all to the third day of our conference and to a very special session that's going to be all about fish and about how do we communicate, not just about fish, but also our fishing community. So we're very glad to be here. Before kicking things off, I wanted to just share with you a couple of reminders. So I wanted to share how you can all ask questions to our panelists. So just a quick reminder that on your browser, on Whova, you'll be able to find a tab titled Q&A. So you can go ahead and ask any questions using that Q&A tab. If you have any comments or resources and links you want to share, please be sure to use the chat feature, which will be right next to the Q&A portion of your screen as well. And when we wrap things up here in this session, we would want you to continue participating with our panelists and other attendees from our conference. So there's going to be a community tab, and the community tab has a bunch of different pages with different sections. Ours is titled Creating Community with Every Catch, the same title of our conference session. So if you want to go ahead and open that tab up as well, we can keep the conversation going on there. So if you have any follow-up questions that you're curious about related to some of the topics that we touch on today with our panelists and moderator, we would love it if you can continue participating there to keep the conversation going. And just a quick reminder as well that if you're having any technical issues, please try refreshing the web page first. If you're still having issues, signing in and out always tends to work, so be sure to do that as well. Or if you're still having issues, some of our staff members are lurking around in the chat, so if you want to just post any issues you're having, someone will jump and help you in and out. And if you're still having issues, our fourth step is to contact Emma at hudsonriver.org. That's Emma with 2 M's, to see if she can help you out. So with those reminders out the way, I'm very happy to introduce you to our moderator, Steve Wong, today. So I am very happy to introduce Steve. He's an experienced fresh and saltwater angler, and his lifelong passion of fishing has led him to a career at the New York State Department of Conservation. He holds a position of Environmental Program Specialist in the Bureau of Fisheries, where he supports fishing education programs and freshwater fisheries management in New York City. Discovering fishing in the urban setting as a youth, he is passionate about spreading knowledge of the outdoors and natural resources to other urban spaces. So with that, Steve, we are very happy that you are moderating our session today. And with that, take it away whenever you're ready.
Cool, thank you. Welcome everyone to Creating Community with Every Catch, the impact of fishing in urban waterways. I was going to introduce myself, but thank you, Liz. We have Liz and Isabel on the front and back end, and they'll be assisting with technical side of the session. We have a diverse panel of speakers here to explore the topic of fishing and communicating with and about the fishing community. I'm sure you'll find the stories intriguing and very insightful. Fishing has deep roots in many cultures and subcultures in our area, and it has been used for a range of purposes, including subsistence, commercial fishing, and recreational angling. Because fish are underwater, they are often less visible than other natural resources, but anglers often remind us that these amazing creatures are out there in our waterways. Anglers are primary and frequent users of fisheries as a resource, so in order to protect fisheries and anglers themselves, it is important to communicate critical information with this community. The goal of the session is to share stories and lessons learned about the fishing community in our region. How do we improve communication with our fishing community? What can we do to increase community knowledge about risk, policies, and best fishing practices? By exploring these questions and more, our session will discuss the ways we can target our actions to help foster environmental stewardship through fishing at our local waterfronts. Shortly, we will be introducing our panelists. They will be sharing their stories and expertise in their fields, and we will be discussing 3 topics on ways we can work together to improve communication with and about our fishing community. Our 3 panelists will be introducing themselves. So panelists, please state your name, affiliation, and role. What inspired you to be here today, and how does fishing play a role in your life? So we're going to start with Hugh Carola. Hugh, are you ready?
I am ready. Thank you, Steve.
Right.
So
No
I'm Hugh
problem.
Carola. I'm the program director at Hackensack Riverkeeper, a job that I've had since 2001. I've been a professional environmental and clean water advocate since 1999. What brought me here, in addition to my representing Hackensack Riverkeeper with HEP, is the fact that it's so important. It's always been important to me that everyone be and feel welcome at the water's edge, and that everyone who is we are all watershed citizens, and as citizens we have rights and we have responsibilities, and very often they just work wonderfully together, but sometimes they're at odds. And for myself and in my work, like I would imagine many of you, if not all of you, in your work, that there is the push and the pull between those two things, rights and responsibilities. And I think in this forum, we can share and educate each other and do even better in the field with our neighbors and friends. Thanks.
Thank you, Hugh. Next, we're going to move on to Peter Park. And Peter, you have some slides. I'll give you a moment to cue those up.
So, hi, everybody. Just to check to see the slides work, Steve.
Yep, we can see them.
Okay, cool.
Go for it.
I'm Peter. I'm Peter Park. I'm an assistant professor at Farmingdale, and previously I was at Nye College. And some of the things I'll share with you is I work at both institutions. Really, in just a couple minutes, I'll share basically. Well, if you get to know me, you'll realize quickly that there's three things about me that kind of keep me going when it comes to just the day ins and day outs of my life. I'm Korean. I love, excuse me, I love fish, and I currently, I'm a professor, so I love to teach. I wanted to just quickly share a picture of where I grew up. It's Queens, it's Sunnyside, it's nowhere near water, and my parents actually, when they came to this country, they opened a fish market. So just letting you know that that's kind of my roots. The next slide I wanted to show you is proof that I actually fish. And I feel a little, nervous about sharing this picture because, I'm kind of bragging, but what I can say is each one of those fish are caught in New York City. And so just letting you know that before I was a scientist, I grew up fishing locally, and especially in the East River. And one thing I want to kind of express early on is there are not really many places in the world where you can catch really cool fish with backgrounds like this. And hopefully indirectly, you can see how fish and fishing kind of drive my everyday thoughts and everyday things when it comes to both work and leisure. And then this is my last slide for my intro, is just to show you we're surrounded by skyscrapers and we're in and amongst the concrete jungle, but in and around us is a lot of unseen life, and I think fishing kind of brings that life to light.
All right, thank you, Peter. And last, we have Audrey Van Gnechten.
Hey everyone.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, good. Yes.
Yeah.
Hey everyone. I'm Audrey Van Gnechten. I work with New York State Department of Health. I work in the Center for Environmental Health and the Outreach and Education Unit. And I'm the program manager for the Hudson River Fish Advisory Outreach Project. I came to my position sort of accidentally, but in the process of working here now for over 10 years, I have realized that I'm very passionate about public health, about science communication, and have developed a love of fish. So I essentially never really fished before I started this job, but then completely caught the bug. when DEC took me out on the river a few times, and I was able to volunteer with them and catch massive striped bass. And I have, kind of become obsessed with striped bass over the years, and it's great. So now I recreationally fish as well with my family, although I am not nearly as successful as Peter or Steve. We're working on it, and it's a family thing. So we have a lot of fun. Yes, that's it.
All right, thank you everyone for your introductions. We're going to move into the first topic, which is raising awareness and increasing community knowledge about best fishing practices. We will be discussing raising awareness around risk, regulations, and best fishing practices within our communities, and how we can continue to improve communications between our agencies, NGOs, and community groups. We'd like to start the topic with a story from Hugh on grassroots organizing and advocacy in marine waters around New Jersey and New York. So Hugh, if you are ready, go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. And I'm standing up because if I was there with you all, if we were down at the conference house or if we were at the customs house, I would be, doing this, bouncing around a little bit. That's how I roll, and that's how I like to be. So I'm going to share with you 3 vignettes that all center around the crabbing ban in the New Jersey side of the harbor estuary. And specifically, we're talking about the Newark Bay complex. So the waters of Newark Bay, the tidal reaches of the Hackensack River, the Passaic River, and the New Jersey sides of both the Arthur Kill and the Kill-Van Kull. Back in 1999, after a quite exhaustive series of research, it was determined by and when I say DEP, I mean New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, okay? It was determined by the DEP and by the Department of Health and Senior Services that the levels of contamination in blue claw crabs caught in the Newark Bay complex were so problematic that there was literally no way to craft or create any kind of a safe consumption amount, that it had to be a complete ban on consuming and therefore obviously a ban on fishing for them. And so in 1999, 2000, with great fanfare, the DEP rolled out a quite impressive series of public information events and public information, public health activities that were centered around 5 cities in northeastern New Jersey, in Passaic, Bayonne, Jersey City, Newark, and Elizabeth. And in each of those 5 communities, there were community groups who were essentially chosen to be the leaders in those communities of explaining to people and sharing the knowledge, the information about the danger of consuming crabs from their local waters. At Hackensack Riverkeeper, we'd only been on the job for like 2-3 years, and we were chosen to be sort of like the clearinghouse. We had stacks and stacks and stacks of printed material, of information, we had stacks of VHS tapes in English and Spanish that were shown at various locations, in barbershops, in bodegas, and in all sorts of, in schools and at events, to just get the word out to people that yes, although fish is good food and although crabs are delicious, these crabs here in your local waters are not safe for you to eat, and therefore you can't do it. In addition to the state saying that, this is the level of danger and you shouldn't eat them, they also made it literally illegal. Like they proscribed crabbing within the Newark Bay complex, making it against the law. And the signs that were put up around the complex were rather convoluted and very, very wordy. And they start with, do not catch, do not eat. Okay. You would think they would have thought to use wording more, in line with what the fishing communities understand, like these waters closed. I get it, fishing, crabbing prohibited. Okay, but no, didn't have that. Fine. But we're all out there and reaching out to the public and getting the word out. Okay. So there was a big event. There were a series of release events or events where in each of these 5 communities, the one at Bayonne I attended, And it was great. There was stuff for kids to do. There was important stuff going on. You know, all the information you could possibly want, it was all there and available. But I am thinking to myself, yeah, well, you see, I'm on the water a lot and I'm near the water a lot. So I'm going to probably run into folks who got crab pots and crab traps and, you know, all sorts of things that you do and take with you when you're crabbing. And I'm going to be that guy who says, hi, let me have to explain to you. So what I wanted, my takeaway that I wanted to get from this big, wonderful outreach event was, can somebody please give me 1 or 2 sentences that I can use to people when they ask me, why? Or how come? Or explain to me, huh? I needed something. So I walked up to a guy, I don't know which agency he worked at, but I asked that question, do you possibly have a little bit of just something I can give to people that explains the literal danger of the crabs from these waters? The guy's like, he goes, all right. He says, on balance, so, you know, on balance, it is probably safer to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day than it is to regularly eat crabs from these waters. Now, of course, the operative word is regularly. You know, 1 crab or 1 meal is not going to kill you, and more than likely isn't going to cause any lasting damage, but a regular diet, or even a semi-regular diet of crabs from those affected waters. Some of the research they came up with showed a nearly 1-to-1 correlation between regular consumption of crabs from the Bay Complex and cancer. Okay, then, that was my 2 sentences. And I'm like, thank you. And I continue to use that information all the time. Rarely with anybody who's actually crabbing, but just on the boat or in general when I'm doing what I do. So that's vignette number 1. Vignette number 2 happens about 3 years later. Hackensack Riverkeeper is more involved in the communities. This guy right here is 20 years younger, and I'm all full of piss and vinegar because I'm an environmental advocate. And I know all these things and all this sort of thing, and I'm just all righteous and such all. But around that time, about 2003, 2004, was when the money ran out for the crabbing sessions. There were no longer any literature being printed or being distributed. We had a lot, and the piles went down. We gave it all away, but we didn't have any. And our calls were like, nah, we don't have, the funding is gone. We're not going to be making any more of those. So whether I noticed it or not, whether I noticed it because the state had just stopped, you know, the partners were still doing what they could in those 5 communities, but we weren't getting the level of support that we had been getting when the money was still rolling. Whether it was because of that change or not, I began to notice more and more people crabbing. And again, I have no power. I work for these guys. I don't work for the state. I cannot make anybody stop. But what else I didn't have was anybody to call to say, hey, there's a problem over here at this location, and maybe you might think to send some conservation officers to not round people up, but explain in your uniform and your high and tight haircut and all that sort of thing why it's not good to do what you're doing here. It was, I believe it was a HEP conference in around 2003, 2004. Panel discussion, not unlike this we're doing right now, although it was in 3D. There was a guy on the panel from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. I don't know what division, I don't know, but he was that guy from DEP, representing DEP on the panel. Whatever it was about, it was done. Each person spoke. Finally, are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Carola over there in the corner. And I basically asked him, I just said, look, this is going on, and it's crabbing is illegal. It's illegal because they're dangerous to eat. And we had a multi-year program in process to let people know. And now we're sort of floundering on our own. It's illegal. Don't you think there ought to be the next step ought to be enforcement or some kind of targeted enforcement now that we've done multi years of education outreach? He doesn't say to me, oh, you make a good point, Mr. Carola. Yeah, no. Now, maybe because, again, I was full of piss and vinegar and I kind of, maybe showed a little bit of that. He gets his back up and his literal answer to me was, so what do you think we ought to do? Bust poor people? That was his answer to my question. I, being full of the aforementioned, say, no, that's not what I'm saying. But is it better that they poison themselves and their kids? Is that better? His response was, there was no response. And he sat down. And I'm like, great. And I sat down, thinking now we're on our own, and the people who are being affected by these contaminated crabs are on their own, and that's really the bad part. That's the part that's really got me pissed. But we're on our own. So me and Captain Bill and the rest of us at Riverkeeper, and in all of those 5 organizations in those communities, and all of our colleagues in conservation are in. It's up to us now. But again, we have no power to say, don't do that and make people stop. We have only the power of persuasion, gentle, respectful persuasion, which goes to my 3rd and final vignette. About 10 years ago, I do the eco cruises for Hackensack Riverkeeper. Most of our tours are at a Laurel Hill Park in Secaucus. So for whatever reason, I got down there ridiculously early. So I parked the boat, I get out, get the life jackets ready, do what I do, putzing around and doing stuff. Car pulls in the parking lot, a couple guys get out. And what are they carrying with them? They got the long nets, they got the package of chicken legs, and they got the crab traps. Like, gosh, really? I got to do this now? All right, fine, but I got to do it because, again, we're on our own now. So put on my nice environmentalist smile, very nice. Hey guys, how you doing? Kind of okay. I said, look, not trying to bust your chops, not trying to cause trouble. I just want to let you know that it's actually against the law to fish for crabs here. It's against the law to fish in these waters. And I said, and I'm about to say, you could just go, over the hill to the Hudson, or maybe down to Raritan Bay, where it is legal. Still not necessarily healthy for certain people, but it's legal. So I'm just trying to be real nice, and I'm being met with a kind of a blank stare or a blank look, as I recognize as what we often get from someone whose language is not English or is not comfortable in responding to you in English. So I said, ¿Están ustedes hablando español? Sí, señor. Okay. And again, now my Spanish is, Elizabeth says it's not broken, but it really kind of is. But one thing I learned years ago was when you don't know somebody, you say usted, meaning that's the respectful form of you. Okay, if you don't know them, regardless of who they are or what ustedes, muchas gracias. So anyhow, so I said, gentlemen, basically, es contra de la ley a pescar por cangrejos azules aquí, en estas aguas. It's against the law to fish for crabs in these waters. The answer, the question, ¿por qué? Why? Porque los cangrejos son contaminados. And I'm trying to think of, how do I say chromium, hexavalent chromium in Spanish? How do I say, mercury? I should know mercury. And I'm really floundering here, trying to, los cangrejos son, and I'm trying to just think of a way to clearly get through to these gentlemen. And I took a stab and I said, mis amigos, los cangrejos aquí, los cangrejos en este aguas, los cangrejos aquí son sucios. Now, these crabs here in these waters, son means are always, okay? Sucios. Now, in the dictionary, sucia means dirty, soiled, what have you. But culturally, to most folks whose first language is Spanish, I learned that sucia is nasty. It's got a nasty connotation. In other words, if it's sucio, I don't want to see it. If it's sucio, I don't want to look at it. And if it's sucio, I sure as hell don't want to eat it. And these two guys went, when I said, los cangrejos son sucios, they went, see, claro? Really? Yeah? And at that point, I knew I had it. I got the word, you know. And so in my Spanish and their English, we communicated wonderfully. And I explained to these gentlemen that, yes, you know, this is not the place to fish, but there are other places not far away that you could get to right now in 20 minutes or so and be fine. And they thanked me, and I thanked them, more importantly, because I knew at that point they were not going to bring home contaminated food to their children, to their neighbors and friends, to young women, to anybody. And while we are still on our own in a sense, anybody out there from DEP want to maybe take a stab at gentle enforcement? I'm happy to help. But it was a point that needed to be made. And it's a story that I tell all the time, and I'm just very, very happy that I was that guy there, not being like, you know, not being a jerk, not being that like white savior or whatever you want to call it. I was just a guy with a boat at the water, just talking, and it worked. So thank you for your time. I guess we'll have some questions or whatever. So yeah, so thank you for your time, everybody. And thank you for being at this conference.
Hugh, thank you for sharing your story. That was a wonderful example of your passion for the resource and the community. This leads us straight into our group discussion. One important first step to raising awareness and increasing community knowledge is knowing who your constituents are. So to all of the panelists, can you describe, or to your best ability, can you describe the fishing community to our audience?
The community where I work is incredibly diverse and is getting even more diverse. You know, the signs are currently in English and Spanish and Portuguese, but we really need to see these signs in Urdu and in Hindi and in Gujarati and in Korean and in Chinese and in Haitian Creole. Yeah, and I absolutely love seeing new people discovering the resource and in coming to the water's edge and fishing. And I always, again, with the smile and gentleness and just trying to be like that good guy, you know, at the water's edge and welcoming them. I'm glad you're here. Glad you're here. So yeah, it's incredible. I love it. I really do.
I would say too, similar to Hugh's statement, I'm based in Albany, but our project area essentially extends from Hudson Falls and Washington County all the way down to New York City. So we have not only a lot of river and geographic area to cover, but the diversity and just like the different cultures that are in each of these river towns is really incredible. So for, you know, for our work, really we rely on our community partners to help us navigate the local communities and you know, who seems to be eating the fish, who seems to be fishing but may know enough to have these conversations with anglers that may not, because we know that, you know, word of mouth is really important.
Thank you, Audrey. Peter?
I feel obliged to round out the group. So fishing community, when I saw that question, when I heard that question, my first thought is, you know, I think back to my childhood, because as mentioned in my bio, I was born in Queens. I grew up in Queens. I went fishing. I've been fishing my whole life. My parents owned a fish market. My father took me fishing as a kid. mostly catch and release. But to me, fishing has been central to my life. Like those who know me, like I live to fish. And so in my brain, I have this like Venn diagram of three perspectives or aspects, and I wrote it down. One is when I think about my fishing friends as part of the fishing community, experience or the experience of what they get out of time on the water is huge. Whether it's going out to try out a new lure or catch a new fish or just try out a new spot and do some science as you're figuring out new terrain. But there's also times and places where one may be interested in harvesting fish, and so part of the experience is also considering maybe being able to catch a fish for a meal. And so there are anglers who strictly do catch and release, some who do both, some who are interested in harvesting, and that's part of their experience. And then surely, growing up as a Korean American, fishing to me and my ethnic identity is huge. A lot of my initial fishing friends were also Korean, and so and actually I have a number of friends who we kind of found each other in our later years. Like serendipitously, it's so interesting because we had such a common story where like growing up, going to school, we each got into fishing in our own way, and then we found each other in our adult years, and we have our own sort of personality when it comes to fishing. But it was just really interesting to know that there were these other paths that were eventually going to converge, and we all had this common story. And a big part of it is growing up Asian in the city. And so when I think of community, there's so many layers. But if I could focus on the thing that's like holding it all together, it's definitely like the purpose behind what the experience is about. Just the appreciation for the resource, and also the sense of community that comes with it. And so I think that any conversation we have about community has to touch on all those things. There's so many things, and it probably will be like a dissertation worth of work trying to figure out how we can hit the mark each and every time with every person that we meet.
Cool, thank you, everyone. Looks like we're going pretty quick. I want to hop to my next question. What do best fishing practices mean to you? And do you think the fishing community has an awareness of it?
That's two really good loaded questions there. Yeah, I mean, obviously following the law clearly, and the what you're allowed to take, and the sizes of fish and the numbers of fish. I don't walk around looking in people's buckets, but I would probably, I'm in Atlantic City, so I would gamble that, yeah, probably there's some undersized stripers or any number of other fish that ought not to be taken home in some folks' buckets, let alone the fact that they shouldn't even take anything home from the Hackensack River safely. But yeah, so there's definitely some work that needs to be done. And not just among people where there's a language or culture issue. There's a whole lot of old white guys out there who'll tell you, they're all right. I've been eating for 40 years. And that's why you talk like that, Grandpa, because, and there's a lot of young white guys out there, who, I have maybe a little bit easier to talk to because, they think I'm one of them, but yeah, so I don't think there's I don't think, again, it's just my guessing out here, that I don't think there's a particularly strong, sportsman ethic, widely held amongst, and that goes, and a lot of it may come from not knowing, and also come from not having the tools to learn that stuff clearly. I think that, angling has not been seen as a city thing, despite what you guys do. but it needs to be because more and more and more and more and more people are doing it. So I think we need to be more cognizant of that, and fill those holes and those knowledge holes.
Peter, you're a recreational angler. Do you feel similar to what Hugh was saying?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see an increase and interest in the hobby. It was quite rare to see. Well, I mean, where I fished, I didn't really see young people, but like now this is anecdotal, but I see more, and so I think there is an increasing popularity of the hobby. When it comes to fishing practices, you know, I actually thought of like two arrows. Like one arrow is like the angler going into the fishing, and they have these best practices in mind, like catch and release, you know, appreciating the fish. And I love that, you know, people are taking pictures of the fish, you know, like before they release, so you could share kind of that resource. So there's definitely best practices in that way, like sort of respecting the fish. But there's also like one thing that I think about when I think of best fishing practices is, you know, in my experience, I always have respected anglers for really being like natural born scientists, because you go to a fishing spot, you have to figure it out. You do trial and error, and it's very, very cognitive, a hobby. At the same time, anglers are remarkably teachable. Like they want to learn, right? And so they want to learn from one another. They want to learn about like new ways of doing what they're doing, which is the same thing. And so I think that other part of fishing practices, like what good or best fishing practices comes down to is how we like receive information, you know, as anglers. And as we receive that information, like, you know, what we do with that information, and how does that grow us as a person, grow us as an angler. And so I think that when it comes to having conversations that might be difficult, and one person might be familiar with maybe you know, some research that's pertaining to the quality of the water, those are really they could be very difficult conversations to have if there isn't sort of a mutual trust there. And I think that best fishing practices requires kind of like an appreciation of not just the fishing, but like the person and the authenticity and like the all the things that are not fishing, but it's like it's like just being human. That comes with just being responsible, you know, ultimately for conserving what's in the water.
Thank you, Peter. I want to make sure to get to this, and there's a question from the audience that kind of pertains to this in particular. So how do we conduct outreach to the fishing community being such a diverse group? And in your opinion, what would be the best way to relay messages on health advisories, fish regulations, and best fishing practices? Audrey, it seems like a lot of your work is in the outreach. So would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the language barriers obviously are always a concern. So again, for us, we rely heavily on our community partners, both to give us feedback on who they see fishing and making sure that we have resources available in those languages. That's really important. And I think that, you know, for many years, the way that advisories, and I'm speaking for New York, I'm not speaking for New Jersey in this part. You know, for New York, we really focused on where there were advisories where people kind of should avoid eating the fish and limitations versus where people should eat the fish. And that ultimately, I think, is what most anglers want to know, especially if they're going for a meal. And so, you know, we've worked a lot in the past, I would say, you know, 8 or 9 years, and trying to switch a lot of our messaging to positive messaging and simplifying it so that you know, you really have a takeaway message, which I think is both easier from a storytelling perspective, right? Because ultimately you're playing a game of telephone with whoever you're relying on to give the message. So trying to simplify it and trying to condense it down to like those nuggets of info that can easily be passed. So, you know, because of the diversity of both cultural practices and also the languages that we have around New York City, but even just, you know, the Hudson Valley, I think that really distilling down the absolute necessary messages and relying on the community partners that are trusted are like the two things that I would say.
Yeah, I'd second that. Absolutely, absolutely. Distilling, making it more clear. Again, like those signs, those crab signs, so wordy. Just make it, and you know, simple for anybody, and use language that anglers and folk understand. And also, I would just add to really focus on the conservation ethic. You know, that's something that everybody can understand. That you know, taking away an undersized fish means that fish isn't going to get to reach maturity. It isn't going to reproduce. It isn't going to. So we're going to lose by that one fish. Who knows how many fish we're going to lose? You know, in the future. That's the kind of thing that folks can understand and get and rally around. I think for sure.
I think this lays up into a follow-up question from the audience, and probably the last question of this topic. How do we acknowledge and balance these conversations with low-income communities who are supplementing their meals by eating catch from their local rivers, especially when fishing is a deep cultural practice in Caribbean-based communities?
Yeah, so I'd love to touch on this. And some of this, like, we'll talk about a little bit in my story, which, you know, is just trying to understand the kind of the cultural appropriateness of the advice that we're giving, which is something that here in our fish advisory program at the state, we're certainly, you know, taking a much harder look at to check on that. But I would say, you know, we're not offering a gift card to a grocery store when we're telling folks that there's chemicals in the fish or in the crabs. And so for us, we have sort of fallback messages because at least for the Hudson River, right, it's a very strict message. And even in the, you know, the Upper Harbor, women and kids aren't supposed to be eating any of the fish, but it's advice. And obviously if somebody needs food, they're going to do what they need to do. So we have, you know, in particular in the harbor, the main chemicals are PCBs and dioxin, which in some ways is, you know, mercury, for example, you really can't do any cooking or trimming that will remove those contaminants. You have to just choose a smaller fish or a fish that's, you know, lower in the food chain. PCBs and dioxin, they really stain the fat of the fish and in the tamale of the crabs. So there's steps that people can take that can help reduce their exposures. So for fish, we recommend trimming and skinning the fat. For crabs, we recommend, you know, removing the tamale and not using the cooking liquid. And so that's a solid step. And at least for PCBs, it can actually reduce about 50% of the PCBs in the fish meal. But, you know, is it culturally appropriate is another question, because there's many cultures that the tamale is the best part of the crab, right? That's brain food in their culture. So having to communicate that advice, you know, that's not the greatest thing to say, but that is a solid step that if folks who are relying on this resource at least know that they can take, that's one way to reduce exposures. The other way is to try to point them to better waters, right? And so like in New York City, you guys are lucky because at least there's the lower bay, there's the ocean waters, there's the sound. There are areas where, you know, it's okay for women and kids to eat the fish. And in fact, we don't even have advice on a lot of the fish because we consider it, you know, we say follow the FDA advice for supermarket fish. So I would say those two options, right, trying to relate those two things for the folks that don't have a choice and that are relying on the resource can make a difference.
Thank you, Audrey. This actually plays right into our next topic. which is, disseminating information and getting that out into the community. And our second topic is empowering community leaders to become trusted sources of knowledge. In this topic, we'll be sharing stories and discussing how our organizations and agencies can empower community members to become trusted sources of information, and what resources and tools are needed to play and sustain that role. Audrey, it's awesome. You have an interesting story on working with the Burmese fishing community in the Albany region. You can go right into that story. It's a great one.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. So Albany has been, and there's several hubs around New York State, but Albany has been a hub for resettlement of refugees for quite some time. And we have a fairly large refugee population that's originally from Burma. And this is a community that really loves fishing and eats a lot of fish meals. I mean, in a study that was done of the Burmese in Buffalo, they were actually eating on average, they're eating over 100 fish meals a year. And that was just like the average. There was definitely people that were eating it 3 times a day from locally caught sources. The max that New York State recommends that really anyone eats from, at least from fresh waters, it's a little different for marine waters, but for fresh waters, it's is 4 meals a month. So clearly they were consuming fish at a much higher rate than that. And so in Albany, in our work with the community, we got in touch with our partner, essentially, who had previously worked for DOH and now in his retired years was really focusing on the health initiative with the Burmese refugees. And he knew that these folks were fishing a lot. And as they came into Albany, one of the most accessible water spots essentially is the Hudson River. And so he had taken it upon himself in this massive slide deck that all refugees have to sit through sort of at the resettlement agency about like life in America. Like this is the first thing essentially that they're dealing with, the introduction to American life. He was able to put in 2 slides about the Hudson River, essentially, and how people shouldn't be eating fish from the Hudson River. And this was at a time when, again, we weren't really aiming towards that positive messaging yet. But I had already been on the job for several years and had started to do a tremendous amount of work trying to essentially map the better choice waters, the waters that didn't have specific advisories locally. And we worked with our partner, Russ, and, we showed him these maps because he was saying that, they didn't have a lot of resources, but that they knew that, anglers were really catching a lot of fish. And so we worked with him to put together a couple focus groups of Burmese anglers, and we showed them these maps, and they're color coded. It kind of takes the advisories down to the most simple of levels. Blue waters are okay for the whole family to eat 4 meals of fish from. You can eat them however you want. So cultural cooking methods, which for the Burmese were oftentimes eating the whole fish or eating them in soups and stews. In blue waters, you could do that. Red waters, we recommended that the family didn't eat the fish, and that if they were going to eat the fish, they had to follow our trim and skin advice, which, we were told one time, when we were doing that Buffalo work, that essentially my previous coworker Regina had said, trim and skin fat, take the skin off, cook it so the fat drips off. And this group of ladies from Burma that were in the front of the room literally just burst out laughing. And so, the interpreter translated and said essentially that, what is the point of eating the fish if you take off all of the good bits? So that, that goes to the cultural appropriateness of our advice. So these anglers loved the maps. And it was a small group, and so we distributed these, through our partner Russ, through the Refugee Resettlement Agency. Fast forward maybe like a year or 2 down the way, our partner Russ comes back to us and says, I've been working really closely with some of the pastors in the community, because they act really as the community center and the main community conduit for everything. They're the community leaders. Would you guys want to come in and do some presentations about where to eat the fish and how to eat the fish if you're eating it from the Hudson? And of course we said yes. So for the next few years, we would go in, we do these church presentations, and oftentimes it was reaching people that we hadn't previously reached. People would freak out because they were, like moms would be like, I've been feeding this to my kids, now what, and the good and the bad thing about PCBs, which is the main issue in the Hudson, is that, first of all, some of the half-life of these PCBs is over 20 years in the human body, which is why our advice is so strict. But on the same token, just like Hugh was saying, you eat these meals for a couple years, like you're going to be okay. It's more of like a chronic long-term issue. And there are some definite issues, and it's much worse for kids. But now so now you can make better choices. So we did the church presentations, and that was great, and we got to meet a lot of people. And we always relied on the maps, but there were a lot of unanswered questions that, while we sort of were able to get anecdotally from folks, we never really did an official focus group. We never really wrote down a lot of the results. We just kind of incorporated it into the outreach materials that we were giving out. So fast forward again to now, and we're starting to embark upon another project with the same Burmese community in Albany. So it's been several years. And so now we're going to follow up, and we're hoping to do this with 3 communities, at least Albany, Syracuse, and Buffalo, specifically with Burmese anglers, but there may be other groups that we're reaching out to in that time too. And we're going to really try to test the cultural appropriateness, and we're going to see, we're going to test specific elements of the maps, and we want to really try to empower the anglers in their own community to feel confident that when newcomers are coming in, that they have the resources and they know where to turn, whether it's their pastor, whether it's Russ, or whether they contact us directly, that they know where to get their questions answered, and that they feel as though there is a way, to continue fishing and to continue eating the fish that they catch, but from better sources. And we know that people have switched. So there's 2 water bodies that are very popular now among the Burmese anglers, and oftentimes DEC will host fishing clinics, and our partners will sometimes go to those, and they always see Burmese anglers there, which is great, because those are waters that, blue waters, 4 meal per month waters. So this next project is going to take course over the next year. We're very excited, and we're hoping to talk to both anglers and their families to see how the advice is interpreted, and we're working directly. We're going to hire somebody from the community to help us do the outreach, and so not only are they going to interpret, but they're also going to kind of guide us on all cultural implications, and just make sure that we're really hearing the community.
Thank you, Audrey. That was a really fantastic story. There's so many useful lessons that we can learn from your experience. This leads us right into our questions. And to all of you guys on the panel, who do you think the communities are in the fishing community, and what importance do they play? This can be the community as a whole, or specific parts of the community that you have worked with.
Steve, can I jump in?
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter.
So this is regarding community leaders, right?
Yes.
I think, like every difficult question, the answer is it depends. It depends on the community. One thing that I can say about Northeast Queens, generally those who look for information with regards to what's current in terms of fishing news, a lot of times it's the tackle shop owners, because in Northeast Queens, there's lots of local tackle shops. And so they're like the authority when it comes to both wisdom and best practices and new tackle. obviously more and more the influence of social media has become a platform where there are rising new leaders that have a little bit further reach, yet still can connect to local communities as well. And so I think about those two, and then personally, the community leaders when it comes to providing information regarding just trusted sources of knowledge comes from the heroes, like the fishing heroes. I have to say I'm kind of old school, so a lot of my fishing heroes are not on social media. They're actually really secret. Like they won't even. I mean, I'd be friends, known them for a very long time, but there are certain things I dare not ask because they would never reveal any information, or they would look at me sideways for even asking that. It's like, how could you have the audacity to even ask me where I caught that fish? Like there are rules, So, but I've learned so much through kind of like that process of just learning from each other. So and if they say something, I'm going to listen, and surely my friends are going to listen as well. So like in my little niche of what I would see community, it would be probably like those three, like the tackle shop leaders, those who are like the heroes of the community in terms of fishing, both locally and broadly. And then I think social media contributors too. I think that's getting really big. I mean, both local and broad, but a lot of local anglers have their own YouTube channel and stuff like that. And people listen. They have lots and lots of followers, and so they become an authority as well.
I definitely agree with you, Peter. I I look at social media and I look to them to see where the fish are, and I'm also very tight-lipped as well. So
one thing I can add, just to follow up on that, is folks out there, don't always believe what you see. And I say this delicately because if you fish for striped bass, like, it's not uncommon to catch a fish at one place, drive somewhere else to take the picture, or Photoshop. There's so many apps now where you can Photoshop out backgrounds. And so just saying that sometimes something that might look too good to be true could probably be too good to be true. So it's kind of part of the fishing culture, especially with striped bass fishing.
I mean, there's a book I once read called All Fishermen Are Liars, hilarious book by Linda Greenlaw, the great swordfish captain. This takes it to like the nth level here. This, oh man, oh dude. I would just wanted to add one little quick thing. This is good. Where I am on the Hackensack, it's a lot of the older people are, for the most part, like the older white guys and the older black guys, and black families will come and fish regularly. But as far as the newer communities that I mentioned earlier, Indian folks, Indian, Pakistani, and the Korean seem to be, anyway, younger people, little kids, just young guys, couples, and such all. But to go to Audrey's point earlier about cultural appropriateness of fishing, of cooking techniques, etc. See again, and the pushing and the pulling. Every waterkeeper in the world will defend everyone's right to access their waterways. The public trust doctrine is the foundation of the whole waterkeeper movement. It is everyone's right to go to the water's edge, the closest to where they live, and put a line in the water, and do that. That is your right. That's your right as a watershed citizen. But remember, I mentioned that other thing, that responsibility, and that yes, in Jamaica or in Trinidad or in wherever in the world, yes, those waters are probably a lot cleaner. And the crabs from those waters, the fish in those waters, nothing to worry about, But you're not there now. You're here, and that's great. And I'm so glad you're here. I totally am. But this is the point where you have to just step back for a second and think about your responsibilities to yourself, to your family, to communities, to your neighbors, your new neighbors, and maybe we have to make, and I love the options that you offered, Audrey, the color coding, that's fantastic. I love that idea. So to make it easier for folks to understand and get a handle on the issues and know where they can go and exercise both their rights and their responsibilities. That's perfect. And that's where I think we can really be, all of us as advocates can really be a big help to folks.
I just want to pivot with that last sentiment. What are some effective ways of disseminating health advisories, regulations, and best fishing practices in diverse urban areas such as New York City? And what are some challenges that you have faced in your work?
I would say one of our challenges is that balancing the messages. So everybody wants signs except the landowners. And then you need a clear, concise message, but we need it in 15 languages. And so this is one of the things that I struggle with. We have a sign program on the Hudson River. We have signs in 3 languages. I know from English as a new language classes that we did in Albany for the past like 4 or 5 years, that there was 11 languages just in those classes. So we know we're not hitting everybody. And then I love this example from, we worked with Rockin' the Boat in the Bronx for a little while. I love that organization. I love the work they do. And we gave our presentation, and New York City has this sign. It's a black sign with white text. It's just tons of text that says essentially, fishing crabs from these waters can have chemicals. It goes on and on. It's a pretty long sign. And we put up a picture of this sign, and we said, this is on a lot of the local waterways. Have you ever seen this sign? No, we've never seen this sign. And then, because they're an amazing program, after the presentation, we had lunch. They took us out in their great boats on the Bronx River. And right there at the dock, the place that they went every single day to launch their boats, there was one of those signs. So for us, it's just trying to balance what common sense. It's like, well, there should be some sort of warning at the river's edge, balance the issues of the landowners who are like, I don't want a sign that says that the water is contaminated, that you shouldn't eat any of the fish, and then also try to balance the messaging so that it actually gets noticed, first of all, by the people we're trying to reach in a language that they can understand. I mean, signage is just one piece of the puzzle, as we like to say. So I would much rather have, if people are fishing together, or if they're attending an event, whatever organization they're comfortable with, it has to be, first of all, a trusted source, because at least for our new communities in New York, we play a role, and sure, we're the government agency and we're the ones who are disseminating the advice, but the message isn't always the greatest coming from a government agency, because trust is a huge issue. And in many of the communities that we have that are coming in, that are, coming even from other states, the governments in their home country were not looking out for their best interests. So it's also trying to balance, yes, we're the government agency. It is certainly our responsibility to get the word out. But we really have to rely on those community partners, because oftentimes the message is better coming from them.
Absolutely. And we're almost out of time for this topic, but I want to ask the group very quickly if you could answer, how do we empower these community leaders? How do we find them? How do we empower them?
Yeah, can I jump in? I think the most important thing is to develop a culture of trust, but not just like an immediate trust, but a trust that also is going to be long-term. And I know that's hard because, Hugh had mentioned about funding and the limitations behind that. But I think that, often when there's like an interest or a campaign, it's kind of like, can be like a flurry, and then things just kind of go back to the way that it was. So I think part of the piece to this puzzle that's missing is figuring out a way to identify the community leaders, and then identify areas in the community to bring in an element of trust that it's like, we're here for the long haul. This is support. We're here to give you information, or we're here whenever you need it, whatever it is that you need. So that's one thought that I had when you asked that.
Yes, with gentleness, with respect, friendship, asking, and one of the best ways I found over the years to meet people, a level to meet people on, anybody, is with food. You start talking about food. Oh my goodness. The parish that I used to go to church at used to regularly have a potluck, and oh my God, the stuff I tried for the first time and that now has become part of my regular diet. Just like, yeah, talk about food, talk about kids, those are the kind of foundational issues that everybody has and everybody cares about, and it builds those wonderful bridges, and that can lead to so many good things. But siempre con respeto, always with respect.
Thank you, Hugh. I think we have to move on to our next topic. We're kind of running out of time, that means this conversation is going well. Our last topic is, how can we foster environmental stewardship in our communities through fishing? This last topic, we're going to explore the idea of how we can continue to work together to foster environmental stewardship through fishing in our communities, and to discuss ways we define success and current and future projects or initiatives. Our last waterway story comes from Peter's current research and study of fish using community science as a means of gathering fish data in the East River. So Peter, if you want to queue up your slide real quick.
Sure. Actually, I want to say something first before I queue up the slide. So
sure.
Definitely appreciate the intro, but this work would be impossible without community partners, colleagues, friends. And so I'm just a voice today, but I'm a voice for a much larger group of really amazing people and organizations. So as mentioned in my intro, I'm an assistant professor at Farmingdale State College. My background, I'm a fish biologist. So, Queen's kid growing up fishing, parents own a fish market. Like, fish has just been like my love. It's something that I'm extremely passionate about. And what I wanted to share, to be honest, it's kind of like a dream come true. Every time I think about what's happened over the last couple of years with regards to this project, I always get goosebumps, because I never thought, as a kid going out with my friend Gary fishing in the Astoria Park when we were like 10 years old, like that same waterway would be a waterway where I can actually say it's kind of like a research site for me. So the work I'm going to share has a long backstory, obviously, like way back when I was, really young, but also in terms of professionally, I would say if I could put a timeline, maybe like 10 years, because during the last 10 years, I've gotten to know the groups who we partnered with for this project. And so over the last 10 years, I've done a lot of volunteer work with regards to community science focused on fish and marine biology. And over these last 10 years, I've gotten to know on a personal level, I absolutely consider them not just friends, but close friends. They are colleagues, but they are my close friends too. Like, we go fishing together and stuff like that. So that's kind of the context, and then behind what I'm going to share. And so what I wanted to show you, and I'm not going to do the slide view, because when I do that, everything disappears except for the PowerPoint. So I'm going to kind of do this a little bit. I know it's a little awkward, but maybe I can Yeah. Well, maybe I'll do slideshow because I don't want to. All right, but just know that I can't see anyone, but I'll do this in really quickly. So to summarize this research, there is a network of fish lovers, and we informally call ourselves the East River Ichthyological Alliance, and it could be summarized by this diagram: focused on fish, bringing together anglers, bringing together environmental education, and bringing together research to just understand what's swimming in the East River. And here is a list of the environmental education organizations or academic institutions that have contributed to the work that you're about to see. Just wanted to mention that these institutions also have organized or regularly organized public programs that are community science that's focused on marine biology, often focused on fish. And so again, thinking back to these last 10 years and the friends I've gotten to know through these organizations, I've come to understand that there's a lot of cool ways to catch fish. I know this forum is more about angling, but when we say fishing, fishing can include a seine net, it can include trapping, it could also include rod and reel, and mostly we're focused on rod and reel currently, but these are all different forms of fishing. And the organizations I just mentioned have public programs that are focused on a variety of different methods. There's public fishing clinics, there's public seining events, there's opportunity to look inside traps and see how fish are caught. And it through many conversations, we thought my friends and I, my colleagues, we had thought quite a bit about the possibility of kind of merging the data that's already being collected independently by different individual organizations. And we thought, why don't we kind of come together and try to create a database? And in 2019, basically what happened was, there was a call for proposals for a research grant. The grant was sponsored by New York Sea Grant and New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And this grant was strictly focused on, it utilized the funds from the Marine and Coastal District license plates. So these are New York State license plates that have a striped bass in the front and the Montauk lighthouse in the background. If you have a plate like that, you know that you pay for it, and that money is pooled, and that money became the source for these grants. And so we were awarded, so Brooklyn Bridge Park, Randall's Island Park, and myself, when I was at NAG, we applied for this grant. And in 2019, we got money to do three things. One, start building this database and building these partnerships. Two, start developing fishing clinics in areas that don't have fishing clinics along the East River. And the third one, which kind of COVID kind of interrupted, we try to do winter workshops where we can teach fishing, angling, and marine biology. And so I just want to show you briefly some of this in the next few slides. So that database, I mentioned these environmental education organizations, but we also received contributions from recreational anglers. Now, mind you, our anglers were the ones that contributed to the database. They were all my friends, and they had to confirm that what they caught, was true in size, and they didn't have to give away exact locations, but there had to be evidence to show that there was no exaggeration about what was being caught. And so there were lots of angler contributed contributions, and I just want to highlight some of our anglers here. And also, I do a lot of fishing. I jump on party boats, charter boats. I'm familiar with some fishing clubs locally, and so groups as such who fish in the East River also contributed data to this database. And this is a snapshot that summarizes kind of like the outcomes of this 2019 grant. And so up on the left here are fishing clinics that were initiated through the 2019 MCDL grant at Brooklyn Bridge Park. This was more of a beginner's clinic where everything is pretty much set up. Folks arrive and everything, like from baiting the hook to removing the fish to helping take pictures, all done by staff. And then on the right, you have Randall's Island fishing clinics, which we were calling intermediate clinics, where a lot of times folks who do the introductory clinics, often I've been approached and asked, like, are there like sort of a level 2 type of clinic where we can try, more things independently? And so that kind of over the years, we had thought about, like, it'd be really cool to have like a intermediate level fishing clinic where literally all that's available is still there: tackle, sinkers, leader line, different types of rods. But the anglers come and they do whatever they want to do and they catch fish, but there's going to be experienced anglers there to help coach with the knot tying, like whatever idea you have. The ultimate goal was just have fun and catch a fish, and no judgment about whatever rigs you're going to make as long as you catch fish. And so we gave away prizes, and this is a highlight, the very long eel that was caught in the Harlem River. And then on the left here, this is my own neighborhood, Northeast Queens. This is right by City Field. There's water there, there's access there, but there's never been a fishing clinic there. So we put a fishing clinic together. I've also helped organize seining events. This is more towards the Throgs Neck Bridge. And then this is a snapshot of a winter workshop. You could see folks here tying knots. Everyone had a little kit, little scissors and nail clippers and thread and all sorts of really fun stuff. And then a lot of actually what we did when local bait shops had heard about what we're doing, we received a lot of donations. And so I wanted to give a shout out to Jack's Bait in City Island, Fisherman Depot in College Point, and Swivets for their non-lead. We use non-lead stickers because many of the clinics were had kids and families join us. So we wanted to make sure we didn't use any lead when we're fishing. And so all of this work, if you're interested, and it has actually been published, the 2019 work and partnerships, this origin story, and this is public. This is publicly accessible. It's open source. You can Google New York East River, any one of the names here. You can find the journal Urban Naturalist and download a PDF that summarizes. It's a long article, but it summarizes the work that we did. And so so basically, like I said, this is a dream come true. Korean kid from Queens going fishing in the East River to being able to show others that the East River is alive. I mean, I grew up during the years where the East River had a certain notorious reputation, but and maybe some of that still lingers, but clearly there is tons of fish in there, and that's what this paper summarizes, and the work that we continue to do is also being summarized. And so with that, I will let me stop share. Okay.
Thank you, Peter. That was a great story. Being part of the data collection for this project, it's been awesome watching your research unfold. If you guys out there haven't gathered by now, Peter is teaming with innovative ideas, and I really look forward to seeing what comes down the pipes from you in the future. Again, we're kind of running out of time, so I'm really just going to get down to the point of our last topic here. And how can we translate environmental stewardship to and beyond fishing? And why is this important? Anyone want to take a stab at that? Peter, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, the perspectives that we have about what fishing does for the community, or our perspective on nature, it's mostly cultural, right? And so, like, one thing that one of like these messages that I have often in the clinics is that sometimes a fishing rod can reveal what's in the water that no other tool could reveal, right? Like a seine net is not going to catch a giant striped bass. A trap is usually not going to catch a striped bass. But you don't know what's in the water. The water is like shimmering and it's shiny, but then you have no idea what's underneath there. And not everyone has the resources to have like an underwater drone or go diving. And the clarity, of course, in the East River is very limited. And so a fishing rod becomes a tool to be able to discover what's there. And, literally, I mean, I'm talking discover. And some of the spots that people walk around, like even Randall's Island Park, there are nights where we're fishing there. Or like late in the day, we're fishing there and we're catching fish that are, literally like showstoppers. Like people are walking saying, "Hey, I've been, walking around this park for like, X number of years. I never knew that fish like this could swim in there." So in a way, angling and fishing can be. I'm trying to remember the words that you used. It can be a way to promote the resource. and also lead to stewardship simply by the fact that it's a tool to kind of expose what's already been there all along, but it's just there hadn't been an opportunity to see it.
Right, absolutely. Audrey or Hugh, would you like to go?
Fishing is something that anybody can do. I am terrible at it. I told that to Steve already. Terrible at it. But it's anybody can learn how to do it, and anybody can learn how to do it right. And I think I absolutely agree with what Peter just said. It is a fishing rod is a tool that, yeah, I've never heard that before, and wow, that I just get that. And it's also a way to viscerally connect a person to the environment. Too often, the children of our world, this, and not just the kids either, but it's like, it's this or it's nothing. We have to help them put these things down and pick up a different tool. So I'm all for it. Let's do it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's, for so many people, it's culturally important. And I think that we have so many urban areas, right? Like you would never imagine that, you're walking like along the Gowanus or something. And it is like, it's teeming with life, like it's incredible. And I think that like Steve, you and Peter, you guys do a lot more fishing clinics. Like I just get to kind of hang out on the periphery once in a while, but like to see the look of like shock and amazement on people's faces when they catch a fish, it's just, it's wonderful. Like, it's just, it's such a great way to really, like everyone else has said, to connect people to that natural world that just like continues to exist around us as, we walk our mundane lives to and from work and home or school or wherever we're going, that there's these massive striped bass migrations that are just like, going through all the gates of New York City. I mean, it's incredible. It's really incredible.
Awesome. You guys definitely have encapsulated that concept. And I every time I go fishing, my mind is blown. So fishing is such an amazing tool to use to capture our youth and people out there, because people just don't see fish. I'm going to ask you guys one last question, and just to wrap up this whole panel. And this is the question. Is there a current or future related fishing project that you would like to highlight? Just give it to me in a bullet, and maybe just share one, because we are running out of time here.
Hackensack
Hugh?
Riverkeeper did, thank you, real quick. Hackensack Riverkeeper did plan 3 fishing derbies, which I think we're gonna change to fishing clinics going forward. And they were extremely successful, and we're gonna do more of them. So just hackensackriverkeeper.org, and we'll see you on the water's edge.
Great, thank you, Hugh. Audrey or Peter? Audrey?
Sure. Yeah. So a couple years ago, we released a striped bass packet. For those of you who helped me, thank you. And for everyone out there who may not know, we released a lot of data and some nice graphs that kind of tell the story about PCB levels in Hudson River striped bass. So in the next year or two, we're hoping to update that with more recent data that will be on our website, and we're continuing to promote that info. And obviously the continuation of our work with the Burmese, and hopefully being able to expand that to other groups, whatever we learn, hopefully will be useful with communing with other folks.
Awesome. Thank you, Audrey. And Peter?
Nothing official or formal, but I'm definitely interested in maybe implementing more of those intermediate level clinics at different sites, New York City, Long Island. One parting thought that I wanted to share, just to kind of wrap up, like the work that my partners and I have done with working with so many different groups who love fish. There are lots of different types of fish lovers out there, And I can't tell you those aha moments that I've shown pictures of tiny fish that are often overlooked by an angler. Like I've shown charter captains pictures of like little gobies, and they're blown away, like, because they are always on the water and always looking at big fish. And then of course the reverse, those who are used to seeing small fish get shown a big fish. So fish lovers come in all different perspectives. Many of us start young when we're interested in marine biology, and then sometimes down the line something changes as we get older. But just remember that there's no reason why that passion can sort of maintain even when we're young. And one thing, last thought, I love fishing, and one of the things I love about fishing is that it kind of forces you to have conversations and build relationships. And during a time where the last couple of years where it's been hard, I mean, we're doing this virtually, right? Like fishing, it's like in person, and there is definitely a human element there that naturally comes with the hobby. And so just letting you know, if you can go out, know that those are the benefits. That's it.
Peter, thank you for kind of wrapping it up for us. And I'd just like to say thank you to all the speakers for sharing your experience and depth of knowledge on the subject. Isabel and Liz and the rest of the HEP team for your assistance and creating such a really rich and community platform for us to share. And the Region 2 Fisheries crew for your support in preparation for this event. One last thank you for everyone that participated and or joined this session. There is some upcoming sessions at 4 p.m. creating spaces for youth in our work, supporting their growth in community leadership, and the following morning at 10:30, the flow of trash, how we are reducing floatable debris from the waterway. Keep the conversation going on our Creating Community with Every Catch community tab, and any questions, materials, and resources, and additional information you'd like to share. I didn't get to some questions that came up in the chat, but hopefully we can answer them over in our community tab. Thank you everyone for joining, and have a great day.